everyone, and welcome to this webinar. And thanks very much for joining at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know that may be a little bit difficult for some people, but this feels like a really good opportunity at the end of the afternoon to have this sort of conversation. So my name is Josephine Ocklew, and I'm a senior lecturer, and I'm going to be chairing this event, which is being hosted by the NIHR ARC South London. So the webinar is called Time for Change, co-producing peer research with diverse communities. And what we're wanting to do is to kind of discuss and explore how peer research can increase the diversity of participation and involvement in research, making it more accessible and inclusive, which was really the objective of the research study that this webinar is based on. So just a little bit of housekeeping. So please mute your microphones during the presentations and when you're not speaking, and keep your cameras off if you do not wish to be visible on the recording. We are going to record this so that we can circulate it to people who were not able to attend at this time. So feel free to use the chat function for any comments, and at the end there'll be time for discussion, and so you can raise your hand using that function, and if you've got any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. You can see at the bar at the top there where you've got chat Q&A, so you can either put some comments in the chat, or you can post a question in Q&A, and we'll pick that up at the end. So feel free to take any breaks, and as I've said, have your cameras on and off, and we'll be covering the event on Blue Sky and X, I think. And we'll also share a feedback form at the end that you can give some feedback. So today's speakers, so I'm going to say a little bit as the person who was leading this study, and then we've got our 3 peer researchers who are going to have some reflections. I think they were all peer researchers in this study for the first time, and they were amazing, so they can reflect how that felt for them. And then we've got Hannah, who was our research assistant, and she's going to talk about some of the action points that came out of the study. And just to say that other members of the wider research team, Sally Douglas, research assistant, Leah Bedward and Catherine Barrett, the peer researchers, and Bernadette Kushaba, who's a research Okay, so I'm going to move straight on to this. Broadly, our agenda for this hour is going to be me saying something, reflecting on the study, and then we've got the peer researchers sharing their experiences, and then Hannah picking up on some of the points, action points, and then the discussion. So what I would like to say is that this webinar is a bit of an opportunity for us to have a reflective conversation about co-producing peer research with diverse communities. What we're not doing is making it a strictly academic webinar where we stick up loads of slides on the key findings and the methods and that sort of thing, because we haven't got to the point in the study. We've done all our interviews, and we're still analysing them, so we haven't got to the point where we've been able to analyse everything and stick up the findings. So so some of the things that Hannah is talking about is just some early points that are coming out of the actions. So I thought I'd start maybe with a few reflections. Yeah, it kind of feels like, as many of you will know, oh, I like all of those hearts there. Very nice. As many of you know, the ARC South London is coming to an end. And at least some of us have been working with the ARC South London for a very long time. And hopefully we'll be in the position where a new ARC, a pan-London ARC, will be funded, where we'll be able to take forward some of this work and some of the conversations that we've been having in this space for a long time. But for me, it feels like a good time to be reflecting on this topic. I came to King's College in 2008 for the first time. I'd given up my job as a senior lecturer in social work, and I'd always been interested in this area of patient and public involvement, user involvement. I'd given up my job as a senior lecturer in social work, and I just completed a PhD looking at medical harm, healthcare harm from the standpoint of those directly affected by the issues. And it was a really difficult time for me because my daughter had died of medical negligence. And after battling and fighting for answers, I decided to leave my job as a senior lecturer in social work. Some of you know this story. And I decided to do a PhD in patient safety. And for the first time in my life, because I'd been teaching a lot on user involvement in the preceding years, I found myself as what you might call a lived experience researcher, a mother, parent who'd lost a child, who felt very vulnerable as a result of that process, and wanting to see change from that personal perspective, but also then having done a PhD and wanting to take forward these issues with a strong emphasis on lived experience. I got quite a shock coming into King's at the lack of inclusivity and diversity in the research workforce. Certainly for the 5 years that I was in my first patient safety centre, I was the only Black person in the whole of that centre. And those experiences can be really, really difficult and painful. And really over the last 10, 15 years, as I've moved forward in research, I think that the issues of that lack of diversity and inclusivity, both in the research workforce and also with patient and public involvement, has become more and more of a pressing issue. And that's why I feel that at this point, really is the right time to be talking about a time for change, because I do feel like we can't just keep on doing things the same way that we've been doing for a long time. We do need to do things differently. We need to do things more equitably, and we need to be much more inclusive in the people that are able to be involved. You may be interested to look at my recent paper that I've just published. It's called Inequitably Harmed, a Scoping Review Protocol on Patient Safety in Diverse Population Groups. And it's looking at the evidence on who is more likely to be affected by healthcare harm. And what it shows is that many of the groups who are underrepresented in public involvement, patient public involvement, are the same groups who are also more likely to be harmed in the healthcare process. And there's often not a lot of discussion about that. So you can certainly have a look at that in the protocol. And so for me at the moment, just in terms of my reflections, I just think that we have to go beyond the kind of PPI, patient and public involvement at those lower levels. And this is why I wanted to be involved with this peer research work. And I wanted to look more closely at how we can do a piece of work where we could start to think about how we can involve peer researchers more in the research process. So the current study around peer research had a first phase, and the first phase was to do with research cafes, and it was called Co-Producing Inclusive Research with Diverse Communities in Integrated Care Systems. So if any of you are interested in that, I think we did try to circulate the paper. We've written that up, and what we did there was piloted 4 community research cafes as a kind of small proof of concept study in the context of mental health as a mechanism to increase the diversity and inclusivity of participation and involvement in research with racially minority minoritized groups. I mean, it was a most amazing experience where we did these research cafes, and we also used translators with the Korean community, and it was really powerful. And the paper really highlights the importance of getting out there and working with community groups who have so much expertise. They were the experts, and we worked with them to put on the cafes, to put on these research cafes, and the conversations were like really empowering and invigorating, with people talking about how they were interested in research, but it has to be done in a particular way. So this webinar is largely about phase 2, which has been about conducting a series of interviews with voluntary organisation leads, health researchers and public members to gain a better understanding of the key issues to do with equity and diversity in research, the barriers and enablers in this process, the actions needed by research networks to support co-production in research, and the development of peer research methods. So that's, we conducted 31 interviews, and they've all been conducted. And, the key research questions were, understanding of equity and diversity in research. Is there a lack of diversity and equity in research? Why? The barriers and enablers in the process, and actions needed by research networks to support more equitable and diverse research. So on that note, and I think I'm largely on time, and I've had an amazing time working with our peer researchers. And just to say that our peer researchers actually came from the ARC Public Research Panel that I set up with Savi Hensman in the pandemic. And I've had the most amazing experience working with our public members who were very diverse on that panel. And I chaired that public research panel for a very long time. And then I promised people on the panel, there's going to be opportunities for us to move forward working together around research, where if you wanted to be peer researchers, you could. And so when I put out the call for this study, five of the panel members came forward, and they were the ones who were conducting the interviews, most of the interviews. So on that note, I'm going to start by asking Chris to share any reflections, the wonderful Chris to share any of these reflections about that process.
Thank you very much, Josie, and good evening, everyone. It's with great joy to come and to share some reflections. We fully share the view that the COVID pandemic highlighted, made visible, more visible than ever, all these inequities to shocking levels that we couldn't continue to do things the same way, but the only choice is to do things differently. We have been working for about half a year now, and it's still funny for me to see the title peer researcher next to my name, because I don't come from the academic world, and I couldn't have imagined this half a year ago when I expressed the interest to get involved in the second phase of this project that Josephine described. We've got high quality training about to gain confidence and feel reassured about conducting these interviews with research leads and volunteer organizations leads in South London. We've peer reflected on the questionnaire of these interviews, and then we got a deep dive into practice conducting these interviews, which was the highlight of my involvement. For me, conducting these interviews meant leveraging my own experiences as a former patient, as a full-time carer till recently, as member of communities held at the margins, to create a more nuanced environment, bringing in a more humane approach in research by reducing the traditional distance between researchers working in big institutions and interviewees. I wish to believe that this project contributed to transforming research from a process about a community to one done with or by that community. I personally observed that the very act of being interviewed by a peer researcher helped some interviewees recognize their own agency and stake in their workplace or community. Quite a few admitted to me that they found often challenging the access to voices not typically heard. And this acknowledgement in the interaction with a peer researcher fostered more honest, in my view, and in-depth discussions on sensitive personal topics on equity and diversity in research. I approached my role with humility, with the awareness that I had to make sure that the research questions, the language, the topics for discussions remain relevant and sensitive to the cultural and situational context of the interviewees, but also for us in South London in 2026. I did make a serious effort to use this opportunity to challenge the traditional research authority in my role. After all, my participation in the core of the project aimed at disrupting the hierarchy, one holding all knowledge and not valuing enough the lived experience as a critical form of data. It was my intent to bring up this and add value to the process. When it comes to challenges I encountered, I kept in mind ethics and ethical considerations, the emotional impact of discussing these issues on my interviewees, on myself, as deeply involved in the process, as well as ensuring safety of my interviewees and confidentiality to them of the matters discussed. Finally, I want to extend my profound gratitude to Josephine and Sally and Hannah and the rest of our group for the very supportive environment from day one to deal with imposter syndrome, to deal with this self-doubt. Am I good enough to be a peer researcher and conduct these interviews? We did it. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's so lovely. Isn't that lovely, everyone, to hear those reflections? So interesting and so moving. So the next person who's going to speak is Abigail, who's also a peer researcher. I know that Abigail's rushed home from work to be on this call. So good to see you, Abigail. And yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Abigail, based in South London. When I started the panel members, I would say, coming up to close to 5 years. I didn't start at the beginning. I started maybe a year after, and I had just become a mum after having 2 miscarriages. And I didn't know the opportunities that were set before me. I had a community group, but I hadn't registered it into a CIC. I think I did in 2021. And from there, so many different opportunities came, such as the ARC and being a panel member. If you asked me 5 years ago what I'll be doing now, I don't think I would think to tell you where I was. And if we're talking about being reflective, I think it's important that when you are in a group or when you're in a panel member or so forth, always explore the opportunities that are around you, because there is a lot. And sometimes, as human beings, sometimes life can overcome and you can forget the opportunities and the people that you sit around. And so it's important that you learn from others, and it's important that people can also learn from you. So being a peer researcher, when the opportunity arose, I believed in Josephine, because when Josephine says she wants something, she's going to do it. And so with that one, I wasn't in doubt. She said she's going to create something. She's not sure, but it wasn't more of the not sure. I think she didn't know maybe what to call it, but she knew she wanted us to be involved somehow. And so when it came, I knew that this was the time. So I took the opportunity. And what was so great about it is that we had great training. and we had training centered around us. It wasn't one of those micromanaged training. It was something that we were all reflective. We were able to be honest. We were able to talk and say, I don't understand this. This is the first time I'm doing this, and so forth. Sometimes you can think that if you're running your own community groups or you've been in the community for so long, you might think you may know everything, but you don't. Because being a peer researcher is a whole different level. And this time, when you're actually doing the research and you're actually having those interviews, you have to actually be listening and being attentive. And what I learned is that most times you may have an ideology of certain community groups, you might have an ideology of certain things in the community, but you learn. And I think there was one particular interview that stood out to me, and it was mostly within the Asian and the South Asian culture. And I'm not always privy to be in those rooms, but to just hear the difference with the different cultures and the different diversity that goes on, it's amazing to see that different people are coming together and learning and embracing. And for me, that was the most important thing. Finally, what I would like to also say is that during being a peer researcher, it allowed me to also think about the questions that were deeply asked. And it allowed me to even be in a space where I would like to think to myself, well, how would I answer them? Because sometimes if you don't put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're interviewing, sometimes it might make you look a bit ignorant where you're just asking questions. And so eventually, when I was able to do that, I was able to have these great conversations. And it was more of a conversations than having these interviews with different people. And it was good to have those different connections. I would love to say a massive thank you to Josephine for keeping to her promise. And I didn't doubt her at all. So I knew that was going to come through. But I still got to say thank you anyway. To Hannah and Sally as well for your patience as well. I know your job is not easy, and they send you emails and they're timely and they're, they've never ever shown a way that they've been exhausted. If you've been exhausted, I wouldn't know about it. But you've been on point, and I really like to thank you for your professionalism. And I hope that whatever journey you go on, you'll continue. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I mean, see how amazing people are, that's wonderful, Abigail, building on those wonderful reflections from Chris. I mean, honestly, I never cease to be amazed, why are we not doing co-researching with people with lived experience, and we're going to hear from Vita in a minute, but, Abigail, Chris, I mean, it's just wonderful to hear those reflections, and it just goes to show how much is possible, given that people hadn't been involved in doing research at this level before. So I'm now going to let the wonderful Vita speak. Vita's very passionate about this work. So over to you, Vita.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be in the room with you again, Josephine. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see some of the messages coming in from our panel members saying you're a legend, from Clara and Clive, you're one in a million. So I noticed those coming in, and I thought I have to read them out to you because you probably haven't seen it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it meant to me becoming a peer researcher. So from a member of the public, from patient public involvement member to a peer researcher, it's been a bit of a journey. And for sure, Josephine was the captain on the ship in a lot of that journey. So I started being active in patient public involvement a few years after my son's birth, at the time of realization that I did not need to be just a passive agent in my own health and well-being, but I could not only represent myself as the member of the public, but I could also help amplify the voices of my peers who, for various reasons, personal or social, did not have a spot at the table. And I feel that since I first started collaborating with Josephine when she started the ARC COVID Public Research Panel, which then became the Public Research Panel for the ARC. All of us who have been on that panel have kind of grown together, but also individually, and some of us from public members to peer researchers. And I can't thank Josephine enough for her belief and trust in me and her continuous support and encouragement. I think that as peer researchers, we have all suffered with the imposter syndrome. I saw someone mentioning it on here in the chat as well. And we often wondered if our role is truly useful, because sometimes, you compare yourself to the researchers, and sometimes you feel like, what have I got to contribute, because I'm lacking some of the things that the researchers have. All that, learned knowledge that has been accrued over the years. So, I really thank Josephine and Sally and Hannah for their support to help me stay motivated, but also to help me become increasingly confident. Always checking in and making sure that we're confident. I think that what I have done, I value two aspects, listening and talking, and always looking for a balance between the two. I think that finding our personal voice and succeeding in letting it out, like I'm doing today, is something that we cannot take for granted. And it's not always easy. For some people, it's near impossible to do it. So starting from ourselves, standing up, opening our mouths, hearing our own voice is daunting. But when we manage it, it is truly an empowering act. And to face and overcome the fear of hearing ourselves and being heard will then enable us to help others by supporting them. And equally, working on our listening skills is paramount. And it's not always easy to listen to others. And sometimes we can't even listen to people with whom we live, or people with whom we feel very comfortable with. Sometimes it's hard to listen truthfully and openly from the beginning to the end. And, sometimes we ask a question, and then instead of listening truthfully, we are thinking about the next thing. Or when someone says something, it makes us think of what we're going to say next in response to that. And I think that by doing the interviews, it has been an exercise in this, how do you maintain that intensity of listening, of active listening? And I think that's fundamental in research. It doesn't matter if you're a researcher or a peer researcher or a participant, but teaching yourself and making yourself truly listen to other people is what we all need to work on. And it's a never-ending effort, I think. Especially in a research project where the power balance is already tenuous and delicate between health professionals, researchers, peer researchers, participants, we need to go that extra mile and shed our assumptions and preconceived ideas, and resist the temptation of thinking about the next thing or comment. So I think that that was for me the most important thing, thinking about how important it is to value our own input and to understand that what we do does count and is important, and, put that imposter syndrome to a side and stand tall and say what I represent and what I say does mean something important. But on the other hand, also listening to others in complete, silence and in complete trust in what they are saying.
Thank you so much, Vita, for those wonderful reflections, really emotional, really heartfelt, and very powerful. So thank you so much for that. So you've heard those three reflections from our peer researchers. I mean, that was amazing. Weren't they great? Really powerful. So I'm going to go straight on to allowing Hannah, our researcher on the project, to just talk about a few of the actions. Bear in mind that we haven't analysed all of the data, and so haven't been able to pull these out in a systematic way. So we just thought we'd share a few of them, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Josephine. And yes, Josephine just said we are in the final stages of the analysis, and therefore I'll only be sharing what we found to be some key actions that people talked about during the interviews. So we were interviewing public members, ARC researchers, members of the South West London Collaborative, as well as voluntary community organization leads. And one of the questions we asked these people was, what actions do you think research networks could take to support more equitable and diverse research? And it was one of the most richly discussed questions during all interviews, together with what barriers and enablers there are to more equitable and diverse research, which I think just goes to show that this is one of the most interesting aspects of this study. So we are just going to briefly discuss three main actions or research networks to support more equitable and more diverse research that are derived from the interviews. I am aware of the time, so I'm just going to try and whiz through my slides so that we will have enough time for a Q&A or open discussion afterwards. So first and foremost, one of the things that was mentioned across the board and basically all the interviews was that we need to be better at recognizing the value of the peer researcher role. So one person, for example, shared that advocating for roles in job descriptions and recognition is important. So we should be championing the good practice, which means that if you're doing something well, document it and share it so that other people can learn from it. And equally, if you've done something that hasn't gone well, also document it and make it available to everyone else so that they can learn from your mistakes. So one of the drivers for this project was that we needed or wanted peer researchers to be involved in every single stage of the project, which you've heard from our brilliant peer researchers that they've been involved in the data collection, as in conducting interviews, in the data analysis. They've been applying thematic analysis to the interview data that we gathered, and they will also be part of the write-up, which is amazing. It meant that we needed to provide proper skills training for them because this is just something they're doing for the first time, and we need to acknowledge that this is difficult. And it's just very important to give people the right kind of support. We also want to acknowledge contributions from our peer researchers on research outputs. So that means we will include them as authors on the publications, which is also part of doing this in a way of good practice. Another person suggested having an open repository, like an online available database for everyone to be able to access and see what has been done in terms of peer research, what can be done better, what works, what doesn't work, just some kind of repository for people to access and learn from other people's projects. Also, it was said that peer researcher roles need to be more clearly defined, which is also part of what good practice should be. So everything needs to be documented, and a starting point to develop the peer research role or work further, for example, would be to have proper job descriptions and just a bit more clearly outline what the role entails and what training there will be, and so on and so forth. And then there is also, I guess, the flip side to peer research and recognizing the peer researcher role if this isn't done well. Then co-production peer research isn't always a good thing. So this participant said, oh, well, the university will find local researchers and train them, and then they can get all the recruitment and the participants. What did that mean? Cheap labor. Uganda, can you imagine how many researchers the money could pay for? Expendable people. And then in the end, researchers can say, or universities can say, yay, look at us, we are so diverse, right? So they're saying that when peer research is done in a tokenistic way, it just leads to labor extraction and exploitation. And this is just bound to damage the relationship between underserved communities and academia even further. So this means peer research is obviously only going to be beneficial for everyone if it is done properly, with acknowledging everyone's contributions accordingly and paying the adequate amount of money that is, adequate for the work that everyone does and the contributions that everyone makes. The second point is sort of builds nicely up to the last point I made. The funding needs to be appropriate. And one person said, this comes from the funder, comes from leadership, that it needs to be valued, the peer researcher role. And the money needs to be put there, because I think a lot of people would like to be able to do it, but to be able to employ people as peer researchers, to be able to set up effectively organized and well-functioning groups takes time and takes resource. It's costly. But to demonstrate that you actually do value it, you need to put your money where your mouth is. And I thought that was a very good way of saying what everyone else also shared, that we need to build and sustain long-term relationships with communities and peer researchers, and for that, appropriate funding is necessary. These kind of relationships require a lot of trust, and you can see that Josephine has taken years to build a good relationship with our peer researchers and with her panel, and that is not done easily. This takes time, and this takes money, because a project that takes time always costs money, right? You cannot just expect to build a good relationship with a new community within the short time span of one project. People need to be trained up, as we've said before. It requires, therefore, just adequate resources from the funders, and this needs to be factored in at the beginning of the project, at the design stage of the project, essentially. So there are two different aspects, I guess, to funding or payments. One is peer researcher payment should be adequate, but also funding for projects that require long-term relational work needs to be adequate. And then lastly, we need more equitable opportunities. So there was one person who said we can do better, we can reach different groups, and it's about developing those relationships, reaching people who aren't necessarily interested or involved in research, who wouldn't necessarily think that it's relevant to them, and developing opportunities for people. It's not something that can be done overnight. That takes a lot of effort to train people up. So again, similar points about we need to build relationships that can really be long-term relationships, mutually beneficial relationships, and we want to build equity through increasing awareness of equitable opportunities in research, to involvement and co-production, and we need to actively reach out to more diverse groups in order to get them engaged, in order to make them aware of these opportunities. And we need to be creating more equitable research that reaches a broader audience. So this could be done through other ways of recruitment, for example, because if we keep using the same ways of recruitment, maybe Blue Sky, LinkedIn, X, King's, Circular, email, whatever it is, we might not be reaching the groups we want to reach because they might just not use these channels. So there are ways to do this, to broaden the audience that we reach with the opportunities we have to offer, but also we just may have to create these opportunities in the first place. And then lastly, one person was asking, and then it's thinking about how do we get people, how do we get those more diverse leaders, how do we upskill the workforce? So thinking about developing through the career pipeline. What do they need to be able to become the strong leaders of the future, and thinking about what training they need, what mentorship they need, and what opportunities they need. So a good example that another participant gave me for creating more equitable opportunities and for diversifying the workforce and get more diverse leaders in was precision mentoring, which is a very, very targeted form of mentoring, focusing specifically on underrepresented groups and providing these groups with the kind of support they need to be able to move up into academia and move up the ladder, career ladder, and then end up being in leader positions eventually. And so it's about identifying training gaps, providing the right kind of opportunities that are more equitable, and sharing them via the right channels in order to reach people who you might otherwise not reach. People need to be built up from early career stages in order for us to achieve more diverse leaderships at the end. So that's why I thought precision mentoring is a very interesting idea that I wanted to share with you all today. Okay, I whizzed through my slides, so we can now move on to the last section of this meeting, which is the open discussion.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And there was loads of really important points there for us to think about more and for people to build on and explore if you're interested in this area and taking this type of work forward. I mean, this is one of the projects that I'm most proud of, and I've done quite a few research projects that I am proud of them. But, you know, it's just been so amazing working with people who were our public panel members, and they were new to the panel when they started and were lacking in confidence. And then, you know, they grew in confidence by being on the panel, and they went on to do this peer research work. And, you know, they did the vast majority of the interviews, and we've got all of our interviews and we've done our analysis, and you know, it is going to be utterly amazing when we get this paper with all our names on it. So I'm truly proud of this piece of work, just working through it from stage to stage. It's not easy. It's not easy, and this is why it's so important that when you take this type of work forward, we have the research infrastructure that can support people to be involved in this way. So, okay, let's open it up now. We can take comments, we can take questions. So first of all, I'm going to look. So we have Peter Clark. I believe diversity and inclusion is important for conducting the research and also the value and application of the results. What exercises me is how the underserved groups are identified. It too often seems to be the usual suspects. I like to see the population categorised and then selections monitored against the total population. I particularly worry that too often people with medical conditions are not actively recruited rather than having their views represented, very often misrepresented by people who know them. So how do you measure diversity and inclusion? Okay, Peter, do you want to do a wave there so we can see you? But that is a great question, and we might all have some comments that we want to make on that. I think, you know, I would like to say that if we're going to do this type of work, I have found on my own journey that the expertise in the community to do this type of work is there a lot of the time. So for me, I just think we've really got lost in, you know, we are the experts in the academic structures, whereas, you know, there is such a huge amount of expertise in the community, and so I think that you know, something that's really important is that we've got to, and our research cafes were really important because it was the community groups associated with those cafes who did the work to get diverse groups in those areas to attend. So we couldn't have done it. If we were trying to do it on our own as researchers, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So for me, I would like to chuck that into the pot. I'd like to say that I think it's wrong that we do not have academic researchers who are more reflective of the communities they serve. And particularly, I have seen very, very low numbers of Black researchers from African and Caribbean backgrounds. And, you know, and then again, you know, where you get a bit more of, you know, of that diversity, it tends to be at the lower levels. And so you're not seeing people at those senior levels, professor levels of professors. And so the principal investigators may be people from a very narrow demographic. So there is something about the importance of the research workforce that needs to be addressed, so that we have the right expertise when we're building the projects, when we're putting forward the ideas for the projects and we're building the projects and we're thinking about what diversity and inclusion looks like. I personally have also, and I won't do all the talking, I'm sure other people will have some views on this, I've also started to use a monitoring form, so that I can, and some of those standard monitoring forms, so that I can get a bit more of a sense of, you know, how I recruit. And when I start off at the beginning of my projects and I know I want to recruit these different groups, as well as working with community groups, as well as drawing upon my own expertise in this area for a very long time, I also use a diversity monitoring group so that I can also get a sense of what are participant backgrounds, so that I can, and I say at the beginning that I'm looking to recruit across a broad diversity of groups, and therefore I can't necessarily promise that you'll be interviewed. So those are just some of my comments. I'm going to take some other broader comments. So is it Rhianne? Rhianne Isaacs. Hi, Rhianne.
Hello. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Rhianne, and I am a community researcher at Health Watch Wandsworth and the Wandsworth Care Alliance. And actually, Josephine, I just completed a research cafe last week for the last bit of funding, so that was really good. And within that, we did include peer researchers, because that's something that I'm very sort of passionate about, is including people from the community that you're researching within the research, because I understand that obviously your insights are just richer that way, I believe. But the question I wanted to ask was just about your recruitment strategies for peer researchers, because I've got a whole year of projects planned where peer research will be involved. But I just wanted to like think about actually like recruiting people, because that's where I'm kind of finding that as like a challenge, essentially, because sometimes I think that people think that they don't have the skills to do it, or they're just like, you know, as we know, if you're maybe engaging a certain community, it's a little bit difficult to get them to engage sometimes, because there's just a bit of like uncertainty about what it is that you're asking. So I was just wondering, how do you remedy that, or like what do you do to actually ensure that you quell people's imposter syndrome? I think that's what Chris had said before. So yeah.
Why don't I say something, and then anybody else feel free to put up their hand. I'm trying to take these little boxes that keep clicking up off so I can see people. I feel that one of the things I wanted to come out of this more was to be building a pool of research, peer researchers. So for this small project that we did, where we worked with our 5 peer researchers, it wasn't a big project, and therefore I was able to recruit the peer researchers from a public panel within the ARC that I had already been working with, and I had been working with that panel for quite a few years, so I felt like we had some really great relationships. I'm not chairing the panel now, it's coming to an end, but I'm really never going to forget that panel. We really built up so much trust together, and conversations. I really got to know them. I had a strong sense of who, you know, actually a lot of the time working with that panel, I felt was working to build confidence and trust. And I feel if we hadn't been doing that over a bit of time, I know so many people on the panel who'd almost be behaving as if, why should I be able to be involved in research, you know? And it was very obvious to me, of course you can, you know, you're amazing. So I think that you know, I think a network, a pool, I think that we gradually have to start with maybe building a bigger pool, and we need some funds, because then we have to work with people in that pool. I'd love to see the Pan London ARC. Can you imagine if this Pan London ARC that gets funded, right? Well, they need people with some really good skill sets to lead the work around public involvement and peer research, and they should be really thinking about how they work with community groups to maybe bring together a network or a pool of people, and then start working with that pool around what are their needs, what do they want, do they want training, do they want mentoring, what support do they want, that sort of thing. So that's some of my thoughts. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that in any way. Chris, I can see your hand up. Please do go ahead.
Josephine, you said it all, but just I wanted to say that what is causing this imposter syndrome? Because we're not talking about one particular individual. It's felt across the board by many people outside academia, and we shall ask ourselves if research structures reinforce that syndrome of not good enough, of by not valuing.
I mean, I really feel quite frustrated when, how in the past we've created a situation where it almost feels like some people are more suited to be researchers. Because you know what, if you have a lack of diversity and sort of narrow demographics that are involved, then you're saying to other people that they're not the right type of people and they can't do it. And to some extent, by not having a diverse workforce as well, you're reinforcing the same thing, that we can't do it, we shouldn't be there. And to me, that creates that feeling that maybe you're an imposter if you're there, because the environment, you're looking around, you don't see anyone who looks like you. And so you feel like maybe I shouldn't be there, and that maybe the people who are the experts. I really feel, quite strongly about that, to put it mildly. And I know how much, I know how much people can do and say in this space with the right support and with the right encouragement. And I guess I feel very strongly that, that research organisations are getting a lot of funds. And so they have to be accountable. They have to be accountable. So I wanted to have this webinar as a time for change, because I don't want to see the same models moving forward. I really don't want to see it. And if I'm involved, it's going to have to be different. And if it's not different, I'm not going to be involved. I know that we can do work like this together with diverse groups involved as peer researchers, and the research structures have to be able to support that work. Now, let's look in the questions. How can we get more peer researchers to lead on small research projects? Well, that's a whole big one, I have to say. I don't really think we're anywhere near that at the moment. I'm sure that there are peer researchers who really want to do that. I have done that in mental health, and it is happening in mental health. And so it can be done. I guess I've been involved with projects where the university researchers support the setting up of the project, but the peer researchers lead on it. And the university researchers support people to be involved. I think we need to do a lot more work to explore how that could work well. Which training, peer research training resources? I'm not sure that I can recommend things off the top of my head, but I know that someone posted something in the chat. We created our own training, and we put that into practice, but I'm sure that there are some really good peer research training resources, and I think some have been posted in the chat. How would you see the peer research model working with young people, i.e. the under 18s? Wow.
McPin Foundation's got a model. Sorry, McPin Foundation Mental Health Charity's got young people peer research models, and they do a lot of that kind of stuff.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right. You're right, Hamid, actually, because thank you for that. I was just thinking in my head, I think I did knew that there was an organisation, and they have got resources. So you heard what Hamid said there, that you could go to that organisation and the website and see what they are suggesting. What kind of support do you offer for peer researchers? For instance, if, all these links, what kind of support do you offer for peer researchers? For instance, if there is disclosure in sensitive areas and this triggers peer researchers. Well, I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but in my current project, and I've been funded from the Wellcome Trust, the peer researchers working with me, and they're going to be involved in everything, are what I call harmed patients, right? And there isn't anything written up in the literature that I've seen where we're using harmed patients as peer researchers. And by that, I mean, you know, people who've had some strong experiences of medical harm, like myself. Certainly we've been able to involve them. And I mean, I just know that I'm just doing some stuff that's a little bit different. I'm just, as part of my own project, I'm paying for a support sessions for all of us who are conducting the interviews, so that if it is triggering for the harmed patients in the process, they'll be able to have support around that process. I'm conscious it's 5 o'clock. Really found out in such interest. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your project. Next steps, we're writing up the findings, and obviously then we want to submit the paper for publication. That will be really exciting. And then obviously we'll be able to disseminate that, which will be amazing. I'm going to the chat. And I'm not going to be able to read out, but I can see that there's some really positive comments. I would say a good start will be from trusts that have a service user research advisory group panel like the one from SLAM. Thank you for that. Really good point. Oh, there is a hand up. Let me quickly take that before we finish, from Aisha. Is it from Aisha?
Sorry, I asked a question about the young people. What did you say, Hamid? I didn't catch it quick enough. You said it so fast.
McPin, MC with a little dash, PIN, McPin Foundation. It's the mental health research charity based in London, but they work across the UK, and they've got really good projects around peer support, young people, research. And they develop some really good stuff around that. And if you're interested, if you go on their website, you can also sign up to their newsletter. And every week you get to know. At the moment, they've got tons of young people kind of peer research projects going. So please do check it out.
Thank you for that. Cheers.
Welcome.
So amazing. So much expertise also on this webinar. So many people in this particular space that I can see with an interest in this area, who will have expertise about taking this sort of work forward. You know, on an end note, I believe that we're moving towards the setting up and funding of a pan-London ARC. And all I can say in terms of thinking about the time for change is that I hope that that pan-London ARC will be able to build on some of this work around developing more equitable and diverse methods for being involved in research and exploring that peer research model. So just want to end by thanking you all so much for coming today and joining this webinar. It's been brilliant having you. We'll share the webinar, and could you please complete your feedback and your diversity forms, so we know more about you. And the link is the link in the chat. I think the feedback form link is in the chat.
Yeah, and we'll send it around afterwards as well, but it is in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you all to all of the speakers, and thank you for the wider team who've been involved in this project. And thank you so much to the comms team, Nick, Michelle and Emily, who have always been utterly amazing in supporting this type of work in the ARC. I wish you all a very good evening, and hope to see you again at another point.